there's 4 types of equity compensation. 1 is restricted stock. 2 is restricted stock units. 3 is non-qualified stock options. And 4 is incentive stock options. First one's restricted stock. So restricted stock is actually ownership to the employee in the company immediately as soon as they receive the restricted stock. Now, it could be subject to some vesting periods, but typically it's just ownership right away. And because it's ownership right away, then the employee is taxed on the stock that they receive at the time that it vests. So it'd be the fair market value of the stock at the time it vests would be taxed to the employee as a type of compensation, and it would be taxed as ordinary income to the employee, which can kind of suck depending on how much the stock is worth. So there's an 83B election that the employee can make, and what that does is instead of waiting for the stock to vest and pay the ordinary income at that time, theoretically, the amounts of the company, the value of the stock is lower at the beginning of the company, right? As a startup company, it might be worth close next to nothing. So if you do the 83B election, then the employee will pay the ordinary income tax at the time, at the very beginning, when they first receive this stock subject to the vesting period. So that's a benefit. Now, it could be bad for the employee if the startup fails later, so they're paying tax on some value received early on, and then 5 years from then the company fails. So that could be bad for the employee. Companies like restricted stock because it aligns the employee very well with ownership, because they essentially become an owner at the very beginning, and the company gets to deduct from their bottom line the same amount that the employee ends up paying as ordinary income tax. The second kind is a restricted stock unit, and so what that is the employee doesn't get ownership right away. They only get ownership when it actually vests, the restricted stock unit. Because they don't get ownership right away, this 83B election isn't available at all. The employee just ends up paying ordinary income tax at the time that restricted stock unit vests. This is like the simplest of the 4 types of equity compensation, so companies do like it for that reason. They end up being able to deduct from their bottom line the same amount that the employee pays as ordinary income tax. Third kind is a non-qualified stock option. It gives the employee a right to essentially buy the stock at a future date at a certain price. That price is called the exercise price. And the employee doesn't get taxed on receiving the option to buy. The employee just gets taxed when they buy, when they actually exercise the stock option, and the amount that the employee pays as tax, which is taxed as ordinary income, is calculated by taking the fair market value of the stock at the time that the option's exercised minus the exercise price, and then that is paid by the employee as ordinary income. That's also the amount that the company gets to deduct off its bottom line. And the company likes this type of equity compensation because it's fairly simple and straightforward. And you can also offer it to non-employees, which is very nice too. The fourth kind of equity compensation is an incentive stock option. So the incentive stock options are a little more complicated, but they're really nice for employees because the employee doesn't pay ordinary income tax at the time of the grant of the stock option, or even when the stock option is vested. However, there's some caveats here. The difference in that fair market value and the exercise price does go towards the employee's AMT, alternative minimum tax, which is a complicated calculation. For that reason, sometimes companies and employees don't like these incentive stock options. But if the employee holds on to the incentive stock option for this holding period after they exercise it, which is 2 years from the time of receiving the option and 1 year from exercising on the option, if they hold it for this whole holding period, then they're only going to pay long-term capital gain based on the difference between the fair market value and the exercise price. So there's some significant tax savings that the employee can have using these. And for that reason, it's like a very sexy type of equity compensation. But again, they are more complicated. So sometimes companies don't like those for those reasons. If you, as an employee, have a question about equity compensation that's been offered you and how it impacts you, or if you, as founder of a company or company, wants to design an equity compensation plan, this is something that we do for our clients at the firm.